All right, creepy Reddit story time. This one comes from r/cryptid encounters. The user is _spooky but scared 1. Title of their story is Wendigo, Skinwalker, Scary Experience. I apologize, this is very long, but I feel like so many of the details are really important, so bear with me. I thought I would finally share this encounter because every few months I find myself Googling and looking for similar stories from other people who have maybe encountered a Wendigo for some validation that this is what we saw. And for whatever reason, recently, as the weather has been getting nicer, I keep having random bursts of bravery where I want to return to this location at night. I had some previous knowledge of Wendigos and Skinwalkers because my husband is Cree and grew up on a reservation with a lot of traditional teachings and stories in his family and community. I'd heard stories that I mostly thought were meant to creep people out and scare kids, as well as some that seemed like very compelling real encounters. People are told not to say these creatures' names or whistle at night and things like that to avoid summoning them. I need to preface my story by saying that the area where I live, Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta, just outside Edmonton, has a gorgeous river valley, but also a ton of scary stories associated with it. Fort Saskatchewan is named that because it was the site of a fort during frontier times. So many battles were fought in this area. It was also the site of the first prison in Alberta and the location of the first and last legal executions in the province. It's been said that people were hung in the river valley by the prison. When the prison was torn down to make room for the highway, there were so many unmarked graves from people who died in the prison system that there is now a memorial near the walking trails for all the unnamed prisoners who died there. So basically, there could be bodies scattered all over the place beneath our feet. Needless to say, a lot of people say the area is haunted. A few years ago, a good friend of mine who lives across the street and I were really getting into our 10,000 steps a day. We would go on these super fun walks through the trail systems along the river and throughout town for hours. Since we're both busy, we typically wouldn't go for our long walks until later in the evening when our husbands were putting our kids to bed, and we would often end up walking until midnight or later. Living in northern Alberta during the summer means the sun doesn't set until between 10 and 11 p.m. So we'd often start our walks through the river valley and wooded areas before working our way back towards the residential neighborhoods before it got too dark. Night walks are my absolute favorite, but sadly, as a woman, they can be dangerous. Fortunately for me, this particular friend is a former police officer. Her self-defense training and now second nature habit of assessing our surroundings meant she knew how to take down men twice our size, so we could wander in the dark without many worries. That is, if it was only men we had to worry about and not otherworldly creatures. Despite our bravery, we still tried to avoid the isolated river trails after sunset because of coyotes and the lack of lighting. On this particular walk, we got to the start of our trail down to the river just as we realized the sun was going to set sooner than we expected. This trail was about an hour's walk in either direction from residential housing, so we decided there was no point turning back because we might as well get the distance we wanted. To set the scene, the trail loops behind a large open field. In the distance was an off-leash dog park with a single access road. Beyond that was nothing but dense forest and then the river. As we started walking away from the road, all of the cars from the off-leash area had already left, and the fenced dog park was empty. The direction we were heading contained nothing but trail, trees, and river. The sun started setting very quickly, but was still just above the horizon, casting a pink glow across the field to our right. Suddenly, both my friend and I caught fast movement out of the corners of our eyes in the field that we'd just seen was completely empty. We whipped around because we both thought we'd seen a large dog or coyote running towards us. When we turned, expecting to see a coyote, which was common in the area, we instead saw a very tall figure standing in the distance. He was far away, but looked extremely tall. He had broad shoulders, or something large draped around them. Judging by the distance and how towering he appeared in the field, I would estimate he was close to 7 feet tall. He stood there motionless while we stared at him. Then he started faintly talking, almost like he was calling us over. My friend and I looked at each other. I whispered, "What did he say?" We decided it was best to ignore him and continue walking without engaging. He then started walking towards us. He could have walked directly to the trail or turned and headed toward the road, but instead he cut diagonally through the field directly towards us until he ended up behind us on the trail, following at a steady distance of about 50 to 75 feet. Occasionally it sounded like he was calling out to us, but never loud enough for us to make out what he was saying. By this point, the sun had completely set, and the only light came from the moon. It was bright enough for us to see movement and shapes in the field, but not enough to clearly make out details. We continued checking over our shoulders as the man followed us up the trail. An increasing sense of unease and panic settled over us. At one point, my friend asked if we should run. I told her I didn't think I could run fast enough to outrun him for as long as it would take us to reach the road. By then, we were at least 5 kilometers from the nearest street lights. I also told her I didn't want to let him know we were afraid, and she agreed. We continued walking quickly, while trying to talk loudly and casually, nervously laughing as though we weren't afraid, while keeping track of whether he was getting closer. At one point, I turned around and saw a reddish-orange glow. I whispered to my friend, asking if it was a headlamp. She quickly glanced back and said, "No, I think that's its eyes." We were followed by this figure for a solid 30 minutes. The entire time, both of us were terrified. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking, but I had this overwhelming feeling that I needed to act unafraid and in control. Then suddenly we heard rustling in the bushes directly behind us, as though an animal was running through the trees alongside us. The sound passed us. This section of forest was dense with trees and bushes. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, for a person to move through that easily. We turned around, and the person who had been following us for the last over half hour, who had been behind us less than a minute earlier, was gone. If he had turned around, we would have seen him on the trail. If he had crossed the field, we would have seen him because there was enough moonlight to light up the field. As I mentioned, the forest beside us was packed with trees, thorns, and dense bush. Beyond it was a steep drop over to the river. We looked at each other like, what the heck? And then we just kept speed walking, talking loudly and laughing nervously until we finally reached the road, and thankfully, streetlights. My friend looked at me and asked if we wanted to talk about what had just happened yet, but I was so terrified and said I didn't want to talk about it until we were on our street. We walked in silence for the 15 minutes it took to walk up the hill home from the river valley, shivering from adrenaline and fear. I still had that gross feeling of feeling like something was behind us or watching us. Finally, once we reached our street and felt somewhat safe, I said, "I don't think that was a person," and my friend agreed. I whispered that I thought it was a skinwalker or a Wendigo. We were both so shaken and scared that we were practically in tears as we headed into our separate homes. As soon as I got inside, I called my husband and told him what had happened. He tried to calm me down, but then actually freaked me out way more when he asked me to close my eyes, picture the figure, and imagine running towards it. The second I did, I was instantly covered in goosebumps and felt a full body wave of physical anxiety. Before I could say anything, he told me he had been told by an elder once, but if you see what you think is a ghost, and you imagine that image, and imagine running towards it, if you get goosebumps, it's not human, it's a spirit. Well, this made me cry, and I was so scared. He grabbed some sweet grass, smudged me and the doors of our house, and then walked across the street to smudge my friend's front door too. I couldn't sleep and started Googling stuff. I was going back and forth between wondering if it was a skinwalker because of how me and my friend at first had thought we had seen a dog or coyote running at us. But the height and shape, I was thinking maybe Wendigo. So I started Googling Wendigos, skinwalkers, ghosts, hauntings, and the Fort Sask River Valley. Sure enough, when I searched Wendigo Forest, Saskatchewan, several stories came up claiming that a Wendigo is said to haunt/live in this area. There is a documented account of a Cree trapper named Swift Runner, who worked for the Hudson Bay Company. He moved his wife and 5 children into a hunting camp in the area that is now Fort Saskatchewan, and returned alone after the winter. He said his family starved to death, but people thought this was suspicious, and investigators discovered the partially eaten remains of his family near the camp, along with more than enough food at their camp. During the trial, he claimed he had been possessed by a Wendigo spirit, which caused him to murder and eat his family. He was convicted and hanged in Fort Saskatchewan. This is all real documented stuff. According to Wendigo legends, committing cannibalism curses a person to wander the earth forever, consumed by an insatiable hunger that can never be satisfied. I sent these stories to my friend, and we became convinced that this was what we had seen. I feel like this story makes me sound crazy, but there's just too much in the story for me to accept that this was just some creepy man following us. The sudden appearance and disappearance, the fact that we both thought we saw a dog or coyote running towards us, the extreme height, the glowing eyes, the strange attempts to get us to respond or come closer, the entire vibe was just wrong. Having my friend there who also witnessed and completely verified this, who was also a police officer who did surveillance, Her job had involved assessing situations, identifying threats, and making accurate observations. And she also can't come up with a rational explanation for what happened. We've never walked this trail together again, day or night, and we have completely avoided the river valley, if it's even close to sunset. We have had a few times while doing night walks just in our residential neighborhood, walking past the entrance to the trail that leads down into the river valley. We've heard clear whistling coming from the trees. It happened twice. Both times we freaked the F out and immediately went home. Is this the same thing trying to call us? I've had a few ghost encounters in my life, but nothing like this. I've never felt such an overwhelming sense of dread, fear, and darkness, as if I were standing in the presence of something truly evil. I have no idea why this happened to us, what it means, or whether other people have experienced the same thing. Even writing this out leaves me covered in goosebumps and my eyes tear up. I realize that this sounds like the most effed up, unrealistic story, and a few people who I shared it with in person. I would completely understand if they didn't believe it, but the fact that both me and my friend experienced this, and then the history of the area, just makes it hard to deny that it actually happened. Man, this is such an unnerving and horrifying experience. I love the detail and thoroughness that the storyteller puts into this. It really sets the stage for an immersive and scary reading experience. The attention to detail, not only of the entity, but of the area and surroundings is spot on here, and creates such a heavy and scary tone all throughout. This is some demonic stuff, man, that's for sure. The way it looked, off behind them, followed for such a long time, and eerily called out to them, trying to lure them in. Oh man, my God, that's so frightening. I know I'd be all, the power of Christ compels you out there with something like that. Full-on exorcist vibes here, that's for sure. And the super creepy lore that goes along with it from that area, the history of negativity, the story about cannibalism, and possible possession from this thing. Man, that's heavy. I cannot imagine the fear I would feel from seeing some lanky, humanoid-like thing like that, glowing eyes, creeping, faint whispers, and calling out like that, continuing to follow through such a creepy space like that. So much nope. This is a wild one for sure. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments, or if you've had any similar experiences. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe for more. Y'all have a good one, and I'll see you next time.